King Rhoam Bosphorus Hyrule. In Breath of the Wild, we don't know too much about him, and we can't really count certain parts of Age of Calamity. We know he lost his wife, Zelda's mother, before Zelda could begin her training, marking it roughly 11 years before the Calamity. We know he was strict and stern with the princess, trying to get her to focus as much as possible so she could discover her sealing powers and prevent Calamity Ganon from returning. But we also know from his diary entry that if Zelda's mission at the Spring of Wisdom yielded no fruit, he was going to change his tactics. He hated being so harsh with her, and knew that was their last chance, and thus, if nothing happened, he would choose to be more of a father to her than a king. Unfortunately, the latter never occurred, as it was on that day the Calamity erupted from within the castle and King Rhoam was killed in its violence. Something that has always struck me as odd about all of this is why Zelda's mother had to train her. Is not King Rhoam of the royal bloodline, and therefore would have known the history, and by virtue of his family history, would have known exactly how to help the princess find her sealing powers? How could a seemingly random woman marry into the royal family and somehow know how to help her daughter with that? Sure, you do have to train and learn quite a bit to learn how to be a proper queen when you marry into a royal family, but that's still not a skill she would possess. Years ago, I threw out in a theory about the hand-sealing Ganondorf that perhaps King Rhoam married into the royal family. Today, I want to finally expound upon that more. Is King Rhoam of the royal bloodline? Hey y'all, I'm the Geek Apprentice and welcome to yet another Zelda discussion video. Today, not Tears of the Kingdom, but Breath of the Wild. Be sure to stay to the end of the video for some important information about the channel. A few years back, I made a video with Hyrule Gamer discussing my theory of who's behind the hand sealing Ganondorf. I'm pretty proud of that video, even though it doesn't really stand today considering the new information we've been receiving from recent teaser trailers. But that's the nature of how theory videos concerning upcoming titles age. In that video, I proposed that the hand was the sealing powers of a Zelda way back in the royal bloodline, and also every Zelda since then. I came to this conclusion because I assumed Breath of the Wild Zelda's mother and grandmother possessed sealing powers given the dialogue of this very scene, and that it would be odd for a Zelda to be born unless her sealing powers were needed. Just as the incarnations of Link, those who possess the spirit of the hero, wouldn't come to be unless he was needed, right? But that's kind of another whole theory in and of itself, isn't it? All of this to say, I assumed King Rhoam married into the royal family. But is that true? First, let's look into a few ideas that support King Rhoam being of the royal family bloodline and not married in. His demeanor and confidence. This is a loose one, but it could be argued that given the king's strength of character, knowledge of the family's history, and confidence in his position, that this could only come about if he'd grown up in that environment, if he'd grown up a prince being trained day in and day out. Hence why he trained Zelda the way he did, because that's how he was taught to be. However, it's just as likely that before he was king, Rhoam was simply in a position that kept him close to the royal family, and thus how he'd meet Zelda's mother. He could have been a soldier like Link, explaining his domineering presence. He could have been trained and educated alongside those of the family, explaining his knowledge. Not to mention, his situation of losing his wife, the queen, could have forced him to be stronger simply because he had to. So this position doesn't hold too much water. Another point possibly in favor of the king being of the bloodline is that there's nothing in the game that explicitly states one way or the other, as in nothing says that the king is of the royal bloodline or that Zelda's mother wasn't. And given our resource of past Zelda games, there's never been a queen that we know of, or that I recall. It's always been assumed that the king was of royal ancestry, thus marking having a princess a rarer occasion, but not so rare that they lose the ever-important tradition of naming every first girl Zelda. But what about evidence in favor of the king being married into the family? For this, the evidence is quite a bit stronger and resides mostly in what we know of Zelda's mother and grandmother. This is a small thought and is also highly speculative, But I feel that there's something to note in the fact that Urbosa was so close with Zelda's mother. Now, of course, they could have become friends once Zelda's mother potentially married into the royal family, but I think it's possible that, should Zelda's mom be an actual blood descendant, that she grew up alongside Urbosa. Think about it. If Gerudo leadership works similarly in that it's passed to blood descendants, then they'd both be princesses and certainly in one another's company fairly often. However, there is far too much here that leans heavily on the side of imagination. So what about some real evidence? Well, we have that, and it's pretty simple and straightforward. When Zelda is at the Spring of Wisdom praying for something or someone to unlock her sealing powers, she laments that nothing has happened, that she couldn't train under her mother. She tells us her mother was also trained by her mother, Zelda's grandmother. And it's this last statement that, to me, confirms that King Rhoam married into the monarchy. Because even if Zelda's mother married in and learned the ways of training a princess who carries the blood of the goddess, why would she have been trained by her mother when neither of them were part of the royal bloodline? How does that make any sense? Why would some random lady be training her random daughter to potentially unlock sealing powers neither of them possess because they are not of the royal bloodline, do not carry the blood of the goddess, and would only become a part of the royal family once the daughter married into it and eventually would have a daughter, the Zelda we know from Breath of the Wild? Again, doesn't make sense. And that's just it. There's no logic in thinking Zelda's mom was not of the royal family and neither was her grandmother. Hence, both women must have been of the Hyrulean monarchy, confirming that there were 3 princesses in a row who all possessed sealing powers, or at least trained to try and unlock them, confirming that King Rhoam was someone who married into the family and is not of the goddess's bloodline. So I suppose this wasn't really a theory since it's basically stated in the game, just not in so many words. It certainly brings up other questions such as, were these other women named Zelda as tradition dictates? Why did they have sealing powers if they weren't needed? Or is that just innate to any woman born of the royal bloodline? What about other Zeldas who didn't have a mother who could train them because their mothers were not of that same bloodline? Who helped them? I suppose for Ocarina of Time you could argue Impa. But in general, did the other Zeldas fare better than the one of Breath of the Wild? I mean, to be fair, this Zelda also had an Impa, but I guess there wasn't as much of an age gap. I suppose we'll never know for sure. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking it and also joining the geekdom by subscribing. I also have streams every Thursday and Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, unless I have to change it, in which case I always tell y'all in the community tab. Huge shout out and thank you to all of my channel members and patrons, especially but not limited to Joking Batman, Lorulian Sheep, McToppler, and Geek Mom. Y'all are the best. Also, like I said at the top of the video, news about the channel. So you may have noticed that last week I canceled my streams and didn't have a video, even though I'm actually recording this before that week even starts. Sadly, there will also be no streams or videos this upcoming week either, because at the time this video is going live, Saturday, October 22nd, I'll be on my way to my honeymoon. Yeah, you heard that right. With that said, I will not be able to get back to normal YouTube stuff until November, which will be our 5th annual Hunger Games month. Looking forward to that. But anyway, that's all for today. Thank you for watching.